parent might say, well, this is what we're seeing in mainstream media. I think you can have both answers. I think you can work on strength training of your lower body and your legs while also working on your technical aspects of sprinting, marching, acceleration. What I would encourage the soccer parent to think about, at least and consider in this conversation, is what would make more sense long term? To have someone with no level of strength perform technique drills, or to have someone who has at least some level of strength perform technique drills. Meaning, if they have some level of strength, the technique drills are going to be that much more effective and efficient. Think of like knee drive, moving forward, accelerating, pushing away from the floor, all the cues you want to use. So that's how I would look at that generally speaking. But different variations of exercises for strength training with the goal of increasing strength, increasing muscle mass, but most importantly, increasing rate of force development. I like to say that often, and I'll say it throughout this conversation, because if you have a greater rate of force development, that means your leg can produce force at a faster pace, aka sprinting in a nutshell, accelerating in a nutshell. So in terms of exercises and then ways to load them, like set reps, like what to focus on. If you're brand new to strength training and you've never done it before, focusing on moderate to higher rep ranges with lighter weights. This is a very simple way to approach it. So it's anywhere between, let's say, 8 to 12 reps for 3 to 4 sets at lower weights is a really simple way to start strength training. When you become better at it and you're stronger and lift heavier weights, maybe you advance up to 3 to 4 sets of maybe 4 to 6 reps per side. And those are the two opposite ends of the spectrum. If you're like, hey, that's way too confusing, give me one simple answer. I usually go for like the 3 to 4 sets of 8 reps. That's probably the very simple, like boring answer. In terms of exercises, I think if we start with hip dominance, so ways to challenge the glutes and the hamstrings predominantly, the hamstrings, in my opinion, I'm not saying that they're more important than the glutes or more important than the quads, but the hamstrings, I always view those as the conductor of the lower body. Because when you're sprinting, they're being taxed a ton. When you're accelerating. If you're slowing down, they're also taxed a ton as well. But we'll focus on sprinting. When you think of the action of sprinting, if you slow-mo someone from the side, let's say they're sprinting without the soccer ball. Because like you alluded to, there's 11 players in the pitch, there's one player in net, 10 players playing the field. They can't all have the ball at once. So everyone else is moving or sprinting or accelerating without the ball. So if someone's sprinting and you take a freeze frame snapshot of them from the side, they're having to reach that hamstring forward, that foot forward, and then pull into the ground to then propel them forward. That's a lot of hamstring utilization. You're using the hamstrings a ton. So for me, I like to definitely focus on hamstring and glute development. Both are hip extensors, meaning they extend your hip. If you stand tall and you don't bend forward with your trunk, you just bring your leg back behind you, you're extending the hip. So the hamstrings and glutes are involved in that action. So for me, anything that's going to be hip dominant, like a one leg bridge on the floor, or a one leg hip thrust on the floor, or elevated, you could elevate them, and then it's really standing one leg hip hinge, but it's one leg RDL or single leg deadlift. Those are great ways to start and then progress someone. So one leg bridge on the floor is easy. One leg hip thrust, either on the floor or elevated, it becomes kind of an intermediate exercise. And then standing, there's more balance, there's more stability challenge. That's probably the harder variation. Ways to load them, apologies. There are many ways to load them. For me, it's simple. Dumbbells and kettlebells, let's keep it simple, straightforward. You could use cable columns, a pulley system, bands, but the body doesn't care what the piece of equipment you use is. As long as there's resistance, it's going to adapt to it. And then knee dominant. So let's start with knee dominant stuff. So think of the assisted version of single leg exercises. So split squats. So one foot's in front, the other foot's behind you. You're on railroad tracks. So you're about hip width apart. The front foot is flat. It's taking about 75% of the load, roughly. The back foot's taking about 25% of the load, or just the toe is down, the heel is up, and you're trying to load that front leg or that front knee, that front quad a little bit more. You could hold on to something for support if you want to. Over time, you can hold weights, and then you turn that into something more dynamic. where you start standing hip width apart, leave the right foot where it is, you lunge that left foot back to where the split squat was, and you come back forward. That would make it more dynamic. You're technically on one leg for a moment. And then the true single leg version of that would be any of the following: a one leg squat to bench, a one leg squat off of a bench where you're standing on top of it, one leg, like a pistol squat, is technically a single leg exercise. Um, Nowhere in the sport of soccer would you need to bend your knee that much all the way down. So one could argue it's not necessarily specific to the sport. Um, and then step ups, which I forgot to mention earlier, which are huge. So technically, they are more knee dominant, but it all depends on the height of the box. The higher the step or the box, the more hip extension is needed to get up onto the box. Meaning, you know you're going to have to bend your knees to step up. Like when you go upstairs, you have to step up, so you have to use your knees. Higher the box or the step, you have to use more of your hips. So I like to categorize it as technically knee dominant, but it can become hip dominant. So in terms of a happy medium, let's say you have a box or a step that's roughly between middle of your shin to your knee joint. So you're looking at like 12 to 18 inches for a box. You could go higher to like 24 inches. You can go lower to 12 inches, but somewhere around 18 inches is a pretty solid, like, happy medium that's going to involve your knees and your hips. So if I stand on the floor, Erica, right, and I have the 18-inch box right in front of me, like within an inch or two, I stand tall on the floor. I step up with the right foot. I step up with the left foot, stand tall, and I just reverse that motion down. So left foot down, right foot down. That could be a way to really focus on the whole cycle of the movement. I could also start with a planted foot that is on top of the box to start, with other foot on the floor. Use that planted foot to really drive down, then stand up tall, and then reverse the motion. So those are just some simple one leg knee dominant, one leg hip dominant, and then one leg kind of combined knee and hip dominant exercises. Most important thing is just train on one leg. The goal is to build up strength on one leg. You're not necessarily going to be as strong on one leg as you are on two legs for obvious reasons. It's easier to balance the two legs versus one. But the goal is to get to a point where you're strong enough to have those adaptations occur for the sport of soccer. People forget when you're running, you're on one leg 60% of the time. The last time I checked the evidence. So if we think about that, like, that is a really nice umbrella term from the evidence to focus on. Okay, if I'm 60% of the time on one leg when I'm running, I know I'm running in the sport of soccer, maybe I should train one leg.